What's a good sunscreen for my baby? In today's video, we're going to talk all things sun protection for babies and how to go about choosing the best sunscreen for your baby. Baby's skin is a lot more vulnerable to the damaging effects of ultraviolet radiation. It's thinner, more delicate, and produces less of the protective melanin pigment. Harmful UV exposures in early childhood lay the groundwork for the development of skin cancers later on in life, and having just one blistering sunburn as a child nearly doubles your risk of melanoma. Before you go shopping for a sunscreen for your baby, I'm going to school you on really what it takes, the real deal on what it takes to properly protect baby's skin from the sun. Just like what it takes to protect an adult's skin from the sun, you need a multi-pronged approach. You never ever want to rely solely on one sun protective behavior alone to adequately protect the skin because they have their limitations. When it comes to protecting a baby's skin, you want to avoid direct sun exposure in infants less than 6 months of age. And when you do take your baby outdoors, make sure that you lean into long sleeves, long pants, sun protective clothing that is moisture wicking, lightweight, and breathable, especially in hot conditions. Always put a wide brimmed hat on your baby to protect their head, their face, their ears, and parts of their neck. The earlier you start putting a broad brimmed hat on your baby, the more accepting they will be of wearing it. They'll get used to it. Also, use stroller shades and umbrellas. When it comes to sun protection, timing is everything. Time your outdoor activities either in the earlier morning before 10 a.m. or in the evening after 4 p.m. During these hours, UV intensity is not as great as it is in the middle of the day. Also, seek shady areas to enjoy the outdoors. You still can get a burn and or a lot of sun damage in the shade, including under an umbrella. That's why you never want to just rely on a shade structure. You want to rein in other behaviors like the sun protective clothing. Outside of protecting the skin when you are outdoors, you also need to be mindful of baby sun exposure that comes through window glass. UVB rays, which burn the skin, are blocked by window glass, but UVA rays, which penetrate deeply and lay the groundwork for many changes that lead to skin cancer later on in life, come through window glass. Your child is going to be exposed to a lot of this most likely when you are transporting them around in the back seat of your car and their little car seat. So get yourself some UV protective window films for your car to limit baby's UVA exposure because they can get a lot just riding around in the car. Now that you know what it really takes, what about sunscreen? Sunscreen is another piece of the total sun protective package. It's not recommended to use sunscreen on infants less than 6 months of age. Their skin is a lot more sensitive, more likely to be irritated by sunscreens, but after the age of 6 months, make sure you are still incorporating all of these other behaviors. When it comes to choosing a sunscreen for your baby, what should you look for? Here are some tips. Tip number 1, look for a water-resistant sunscreen. Water-resistant sunscreens, they're not waterproof, but they will stay on the skin a little bit better. This is particularly helpful in young children because they get a little overheated and perspire. You don't want the sunscreen running into their eyes. That can be very irritating. You want a sunscreen that protects from the burning UVB rays, but you also want the sunscreen to protect from those harmful UVA rays. So make sure you are choosing sunscreens that are labeled broad spectrum, which means they protect from both UVB and UVA. You also want to look for a sunscreen that is an SPF 30 or higher. SPF stands for sun protective factor. It gives you some idea of how well that particular sunscreen is going to be at protecting the skin from a sunburn. The higher the SPF, the greater the likelihood of reducing burning, provided, of course, you are incorporating these other behaviors. When buying a sunscreen for your baby, I also recommend choosing sunscreens that are fragrance-free. Like I said, baby skin is a lot more vulnerable to irritation, and fragrance can be particularly irritating to baby skin. This is interesting given the fact that the majority of skincare marketed for babies seems to have fragrance in it. But as a general recommendation, it is prudent to avoid fragrance in sunscreens for babies. What about a sunscreen stick? Sunscreen sticks might be of interest to you because they are a lot easier, it would seem, to apply to a baby because you don't have to deal with a messy cream and they're solid so they don't run as well. I enjoy sticks myself for reapplication purposes, but you need to be aware of their limitations. They are prone to under application, meaning not putting enough sunscreen on the skin, and they're prone to skip areas. So when you use a stick, make sure you do multiple passes and then you want to physically rub it in. Some dermatologists might advise you to avoid sunscreen sprays in babies, largely because of the potential risk when using a spray near a baby that they might inhale it or get some of it in their eyes. If you do use a spray, spray it into your hand and then physically rub it onto your child. Now, let's talk about what type of sunscreen to choose for your baby. If you aren't aware, there are 3 types of sunscreens. There are what are commonly referred to as mineral sunscreens that contain inorganic sunscreen active ingredients, namely zinc and or titanium dioxide. These are metal oxides. Mineral sunscreens largely work, contrary to popular misconception, by absorbing ultraviolet radiation, not by blocking it. They do block to a certain extent, but that's not the primary way in which they work. The primary way in which they work is by absorbing ultraviolet radiation. Then you have what is commonly referred to as chemical sunscreens. Chemical sunscreens contain sunscreen active ingredients that are organic carbon compounds, rings of carbon compounds that absorb ultraviolet radiation, similar to how the metal oxide sheets in mineral sunscreens work. The third category is called a hybrid sunscreen. Hybrid sunscreens contain both inorganic active sunscreen ingredients like zinc or titanium dioxide, and they contain organic carbon compound active sunscreen ingredients like avobenzone for UVA protection, octocrylene, octisalate. Many people feel more comfortable putting a mineral sunscreen on their baby because we have some evidence that some of the organic carbon compound chemical sunscreen active ingredients are absorbed into the skin and detected in the bloodstream. Many have reservations about applying them either to themselves or to their children. The inorganic, aka mineral sunscreens, do not absorb into the skin. They're not detected in the bloodstream. So many will elect a mineral sunscreen. The choice is up to you. While there's no evidence that these have caused any harm to human health, people are still concerned and have reservations and prefer a mineral sunscreen. Now, to muddy the waters even further, a lot of mineral sunscreens that you might buy thinking you're buying a mineral sunscreen that is not a chemical sunscreen, they actually do still contain chemical sunscreen ingredients in the inactive ingredients, namely one called butyl octyl salicylate. Butyl octyl salicylate is very, very similar to the chemical, aka organic sunscreen ingredient octisalate. This ingredient is added to mineral sunscreens as an SPF booster. It's very similar to octisalate, a chemical sunscreen ingredient. To make it clear, I don't have any reservations that butyl octyl salicylate or octisalate, for that matter, in chemical sunscreens. The difference here is that in contrast to octisalate, which is an FDA-approved chemical sunscreen ingredient that is regulated for use in sunscreens, butyl octyl salicylate is not. So you're kind of getting its twin, but with less regulatory oversight. Like I said, I personally don't have any concerns for these ingredients, but for people who do and do not want to use them or who are allergic to salicylates, well, you need to read the inactive ingredients because a lot of baby mineral sunscreens actually have butyl octyl salicylate. I don't think this is a harmful ingredient, but you're not really buying a purely inorganic sunscreen. You're buying a hybrid sunscreen, which, like I said, hybrid sunscreens have zinc and a chemical filter. The difference here is that if it were octisalate, it would have to be listed on the active ingredients, but it's not. It's not a FDA-approved sunscreen active ingredient. It's used to boost the SPF of the overall formula. So you need to be careful with the 100% mineral sunscreen claim because there might be butyl octyl salicylate. Do you need to avoid any particular ingredient? In my mind, the best ingredient to avoid in sunscreens for baby is fragrance, and you might also want to avoid some unnecessary antioxidants added, not because I think they're harmful, but like I said, baby skin is a lot more vulnerable to irritation. Things like niacinamide might not go over as well on a baby's developing skin. Mineral sunscreens are the default recommendation for babies because they're perceived as being less irritating, less likely to be absorbed into the body, with the caveat that I just mentioned that many of these sunscreens are not technically 100% inorganic. They have the UV filters that are just listed as inactive ingredients. Now that you're probably probably overwhelmed and thoroughly confused what is actually a good sunscreen. When it comes to babies, mineral sunscreen probably is less irritating to baby delicate skin and is a reasonable choice. Zinc and or titanium dioxide sunscreens are a reasonable choice for a baby because, yeah, their skin is a lot more vulnerable to irritation, and some of the chemical sunscreens, at least here in the US, are more likely to irritate delicate skin. I've always recommended the Aveeno baby sunscreen. It actually does not have butyl octyl salicylate. Again, not that I think that that is a problematic ingredient, and I have tons of sunscreens that I recommend that do have that ingredient. Now that you know a little bit about the ingredients, let's move on to how to use sunscreen properly on a baby. You should mostly be relying on sun protective clothing for babies. Sleeves, long pants, hats, shade, and umbrellas, and not being out too long. But to exposed skin, you want to apply a good amount of sunscreen. Most people under apply sunscreen. It's one of its pitfalls is that you have to apply quite a bit of it to actually achieve that stated SPF on the bottle. Make sure you apply it before you go outside, not while you are out there. And you want to reapply sunscreen to your baby's exposed skin every 2 hours while you are outdoors if you're going to be out for a prolonged period of time. If you take your baby in the pool, when you get out of the pool with your baby, pat dry their skin and reapply the water resistant sunscreen. Water resistant does not mean waterproof. It still comes off and you do need to reapply it. It just stays on while you're in the water enough to protect the skin because you can get a lot of sun exposure in the water. And in fact, a lot of people end up getting too much sun exposure in the water because they don't feel the warmth as readily, so they don't realize that they're getting burned. And then they get out of the pool and they're like, oh my gosh, why am I so red? I put on sunscreen. It's like, yeah, but you were in the water all that time and you didn't reapply when you got out. What about the sun protective clothing then? If that's such an important piece of everyone's sun protection, what should you be looking for? Well, a lot of what allows a fabric to protect the skin from the sun boils down to many different factors. First of all is the fabric that you are using. It should be a dense weave, tightly woven fabric. Dark fabrics tend to be better at protecting from the sun, which isn't ideal in the hot summer months. There are also fabrics that are treated to protect against ultraviolet radiation. These tend to be a lot more lightweight, moisture wicking, and comfortable to wear, and what I often recommend and are a really good option. They're called UPF fabrics, and they'll be followed by a number, UPF 30 or UPF 50. The number gives you some idea of how much ultraviolet radiation that fabric will allow through. So, for example, SPF 30 allows 1/30th of ultraviolet radiation to reach your skin. Roughly 3% of sun's UV rays will make it to your skin through a UPF 30 fabric. UPF 50 will allow 1/50th of sun's UV rays to reach your skin, so that is about 2%. Pretty good. So if you put a UPF 50 rash guard on your little baby out by the pool, that is pretty good. That's pretty good there on those body sites. You still need to put sunscreen though on the exposed body sites. So again, you can't rely on the rash guard alone. You have to do all of the things. All of the things. UPF clothing can be pricey, but you can get good deals at like a lot of the outdoor sporting type places. Outside of the UPF clothing though, like I said, dark fabrics tend to be better. Fabrics that are a tight weave like canvas or denim are really good. Certain synthetic polyester fabrics are actually really good at reflecting some of the UV off the skin. One of the most important things though when it comes to sun protective clothing is that it actually needs to cover your skin. A UPF 50 bikini is cute, but like if all the rest of your skin is exposed, probably not that good. Okay, so it's gotta provide coverage. The overall fit can make a difference too. If you have a garment that fits really tight, it's more likely to stretch and potentially allow some more UV in and have less protection. Fabrics that become wet, saturated with sweat, and stretch out allow more UV in. So if your fabrics get wet, you're gonna want to change them up. All right, y'all. So in summary, you need a multi-pronged approach. Don't just rely on sunscreen. Sunscreen really should be incorporated after the age of 6 months. When you do use sunscreen, you want to apply it to the exposed surfaces. You don't need to apply sunscreen under sun protective clothing. And you want to reapply it every 2 hours while you're outdoors. You need to seek shade. You need to avoid peak sun exposure times. Stroller shades, umbrellas, get the films for your car window. When it comes to sunscreen ingredients to avoid, I recommend avoiding sunscreens with fragrance just because they are more likely to be irritating to baby skin. All right, guys, I hope this video was helpful, informative, didn't confuse you too much. I know it's a tricky area to navigate, and there is a lot of fear-mongering and misinformation out there. Now, a lot of people get freaked out when they see the environmental working group when they post their annual "don't buy this sunscreen" listing and buy this one instead. On the inside, I'm going to put my video explaining why you should ignore them. But if you guys enjoyed this one, give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and as always, don't forget, sunscreen and subscribe. I'll talk to you guys tomorrow. Bye.